Welcome to this brief journey through the history of the Vietnam War. This conflict, which spanned nearly 2 decades, left an indelible mark on both Vietnam and the world. The roots of the Vietnam War trace back to the First Indochina War, where Vietnam fought for independence from French colonial rule, culminating in the Geneva Accords of 1954. This agreement temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, with the promise of nationwide elections to reunify the country. Vietnam was divided into the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh, a revolutionary leader who had been fighting for Vietnamese independence for decades. Ho Chi Minh and his followers, known as the Viet Minh, had a vision of a unified communist Vietnam. In contrast, the anti-communist South was supported by the United States, which feared the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The South Vietnamese government, led by Ngo Dinh Diem, was backed by American military and economic aid. In the early 1960s, the United States increased its support to South Vietnam, initially sending military advisors. These advisors were meant to train and assist the South Vietnamese army in their fight against the communist insurgency, known as the Viet Cong. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964 escalated U.S. involvement. Alleged attacks on U.S. naval vessels by North Vietnamese forces led to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which granted President Lyndon B. Johnson the authority to use military force in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. This marked the beginning of full-scale military intervention, with hundreds of thousands of American troops being deployed to Vietnam. The US aimed to prevent the fall of South Vietnam to communism, believing in the domino theory that if one country fell, others in the region would follow. The war intensified with brutal combat and significant casualties on both sides. The dense jungles and unfamiliar terrain posed significant challenges for US forces. While the Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics to their advantage, the conflict saw numerous battles, including the infamous Battle of Ia Drang and the Siege of Khe Sanh. The Tet Offensive in 1968 marked a turning point, revealing the resilience of North Vietnamese forces. Launched during the Vietnamese New Year, the offensive saw coordinated attacks on more than 100 cities and outposts in South Vietnam. Although militarily repelled, it shocked the American public and eroded support for the war. Back home, the war sparked widespread protests and a powerful anti-war movement. Images of the conflict broadcasted on television brought the brutal realities of war into American living rooms. Students, activists, and even veterans joined the movement, organizing massive demonstrations and calling for an end to the war. The growing anti-war sentiment put immense pressure on the government to seek a resolution. Politicians debated the best course of action, with some advocating for continued military efforts and others pushing for peace negotiations. Peace talks began, and by 1973 the Paris Peace Accords were signed. This agreement aimed to establish peace in Vietnam and end US military involvement. US troops withdrew, but fighting continued between North and South Vietnam as both sides sought to gain control. Despite the accords, the conflict raged on. The North Vietnamese, bolstered by support from the Soviet Union and China, continued their efforts to reunify the country under communist rule. The South Vietnamese, now without American military support, struggled to defend their territory. In April 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. This event marked the end of the Vietnam War and led to the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. The fall of Saigon was a moment of both triumph and tragedy, as it signaled the end of a long and devastating conflict. The reunification of Vietnam was celebrated by many, but it also brought about significant challenges. The country faced the daunting task of rebuilding its economy, infrastructure and society after years of war. The new government implemented socialist policies, which included land reforms and the nationalization of industries. Today, Vietnam has rebuilt and transformed. The country has experienced significant economic growth and development, becoming one of the fastest-growing economies in Asia. Modern cities, bustling markets, and a vibrant culture showcase the resilience and spirit of the Vietnamese people. However, the legacy of the war still echoes through its history and culture. Memorials and museums dedicated to the conflict serve as reminders of the sacrifices made and the lessons learned. The war's impact on veterans, both Vietnamese and American, continues to be felt, with many still grappling with the physical and emotional scars. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Vietnam War. We hope this overview has provided insight into the complexities and lasting effects of this pivotal conflict. Follow for more historical insights and stories that shape our world.